Welcome to PNW Weather 101, Episode 4. This will be on watches, warnings, and advisories. What are each of them? What does it take to trigger them? And how severe is each level? So I will be going over first the example map here, and this is from my video that I posted early on the 26th. This map from the Portland National Weather Service was taken on the 25th at about a little bit after 11:30. The wind advisory here was issued at 11:37. So what do all these mean to the right? Well, that's what this video is about. I'm meteorologist Hannes Leach. Let's get started. So first off, what is a watch versus a warning? Typically speaking, a watch is when there's the atmospheric ingredients to make those conditions possible, but it's not for sure whether that's going to happen in your neck of the woods versus a warning is those things are happening imminently or right now. Best graphic I have seen from this is what's called the taco watch versus taco warning on screen here. The graphic I took from the Oregon Department of Forestry back when they posted this in 2023 and have kept it in my back pocket ever since. And then where are warnings issued? Most warnings from the National Weather Service are issued by forecast zones, which I will show on the next slide. There are different zones for fire weather warnings, like your red flag warnings, that are not shown on there. Watches are typically issued about 36 to 48 hours in advance, with warnings being issued within 36 hours, or more commonly 24 hours. The Storm Prediction Center's watches are by county, warnings are small polygons in the direct path of the active storms. Watches are typically issued within 24 hours, and warnings are only issued when there's an active thunderstorm or tornado that has been confirmed, usually by radar or a trained storm spotter. Flood warnings are only on the streams that are affected and by flooding, and generally within about I'd say 2 miles from the stream normally. From that, the typically flood effects are limited to the floodplain or areas directly adjacent to that, except in the most extreme floods. Most recent example being April of 2019 in the southern Willamette Valley. So here are the forecast zones from the Portland National Weather Service, and I am fully aware that this is a complicated graphic because all these numbers are Portland National Weather Service's internal codes for each zone. Here in the Willamette Valley, with the exception of Lane County, there is one zone each for the western portion of the Willamette Valley, and there is one for the eastern portion of the Willamette Valley with the Willamette River as the dividing line. In the Portland metro area, there's additional zones for the areas directly out of the gorge, outflow areas, because they can hold on to cold and snow slash ice far longer than areas deeper into the Willamette Valley. There's also forecast zones for pretty much every major area, the high Cascades, the foothills of the Cascades, the microclimate in the Hood River Valley, the Coast Range valleys, and the Coast Range quote unquote highlands, and then one for the far northern coast, one for the what I like to call the northern coast bay, so that's Nehalem and Tillamook Bay, and then going on south to Pacific City, and then one for the central Oregon coast. There's also a special microclimate zone for the Chehalem Mountains and the West Hills as well, though there is no other quote unquote small hills microclimate in the Willamette Valley that the Portland National Weather Service has justified creating a forecast zone for. Onto each category. We'll start with the one that technically isn't a watch or a warning, and that is the special weather statements. This most commonly gets issued for or thunderstorms where wind gusts are 40 to 57 miles per hour, or they contain small hail of less than an inch. They can also be issued if a funnel cloud forms, but it is not expected to touch down and become a tornado. Icy conditions on roads, but not enough to classify as freezing fog, can also be triggered for a special weather statement. Then also any other event the National Weather Service deems necessary beyond 6 hours of significance, but not enough to qualify a advisory slash warning. So typically this would be something like, oh, there's a big pattern change coming. This is the first big rainstorm of the season. The roads are going to be pretty wet, and because of all the oil that's accumulated and from the dry summer months, it's going to be a little bit slicker than usual for an inch of rainfall. That's just an example. Now, onto the actual watches and warnings. We'll start with severe thunderstorms. These are issued from the Storm Prediction Center, or once they observe atmospheric conditions that may trigger a severe thunderstorm. Normally, a slight risk of severe thunderstorms at any given location will trigger a watch. Unlike the National Weather Service's forecast zones, the Storm Prediction Center issues severe thunderstorm watches and warnings by counties. And that's not to say that the entire county will see severe thunderstorms, even if their so-called increased risk of severe thunderstorms only cover here 1% of that county. The entire county will be in a severe thunderstorm watch for this example. A warning is a small area with active thunderstorms with at least one of the following characteristics. Standard warning, gusts 58 miles per hour or higher with an inch of hail. A considerable severe thunderstorm warning consists of gusts 70 miles an hour or higher, or hail of 1 3/4 inches or greater. A destructive severe thunderstorm warning includes wind gusts of 80 miles per hour or higher, or hail of 2 3/4 inches or higher. A severe thunderstorm warning does not have to be over an area with a severe thunderstorm watch. In fact, a majority of our severe thunderstorm warnings that happen in the Pacific Northwest actually happen outside of these severe thunderstorm watch areas because they are pretty uncommon. In fact, prior to the severe thunderstorm watch that occurred in mid-August of 2024, the last one prior to that that had significant chance of severe thunderstorms west of the Cascades was back in, I believe, 2008 or 9. I don't have that data in front of me. Tornadoes. Tornado watch is when the Storm Prediction Center sees chance of multiple weak tornadoes or conditions capable of a EF2 tornado or higher. I could not find one on record for Western Oregon and Western Washington. I did not look at east of the Cascades. A tornado warning is that there is an active tornado either on the ground or expected to touch down. Most likely in our area, that does tend to be radar indicated because most of our tornadoes aren't the traditional tornadoes like you see in the Midwest where you have a pretty visible funnel. A lot of times they're most visible via their debris field at the bottom. Like the severe thunderstorm warnings, the tornado warnings will only cover the expected path of the tornado and generally only last about 15 minutes per update. Waterspouts over the ocean will trigger a special marine warning until they are over land, where it will convert into a tornado warning. Now, just for the record, the most number of tornado warnings issued by the National Weather Service in Portland in a day is 10, of which that they only produce 2 confirmed tornadoes. So just because there is a tornado warning does not mean a tornado will touch ground, even if it is expected it to, though please still heed any tornado warning that is issued. Also, the most amount of tornadoes in the Pacific Northwest on a single outbreak was 6 back in April of 1972. That produced the strongest tornado on record, the F3 tornado, also the only one that has caused any sort of death in Western Oregon or Washington. On to flooding. So first off is just a hydrological statement. This is when hydrological conditions may cause flooding problems. This can be issued for significant atmospheric rivers most commonly, can also be issued for significant snow melt as well. And a flood advisory is typically for urban or small streams that are expected to flood in isolated areas. This is kind of an exception to the rule for streams where this generally gets more issued either by county base or forecast zones, depending on who's issuing it, whether that's the Northwest River Forecast Center or if that's the National Weather Service. The flood watch is when a flood is possible but not certain on any given river. A flood watch can also be preceding a flood advisory as well. And a flood warning is when flooding on a river is either actively happening or forecast to happen. Moving on to flash flooding. And this tends to be pretty uncommon in our area unless if you are in an area that just experienced a wildfire within the last generally 2 or 3 years because the vegetation no longer can soak up that water. And vegetation also can provide a glue to keep the soil intact without that quote unquote glue that can liquefy the soil under significant rainfall to a point which can increase stream flow and also increase the sediment in said streams, triggering a flash flood from burn areas. A watch can also be issued for potential dam breaches as well. A flash flood warning means there is an active dam breach somewhere or other rapid rise of stream water levels causing flooding. A flash flood emergency is essentially the same thing as a warning. However, a state of emergency has been declared on that, or it can be bypassed if a high hazard dam is breached. For example, like the Dalles Dam, just because the city of the Dalles is within a mile of where the Dalles Dam is located. For winter storms, the advisory snow criteria really depends on where you're at. If you're in the Cascades, generally you need about 6 to 12 inches to trigger a winter weather advisory if snow levels are 5,000 feet or lower. If the snow levels are 55 feet or higher, then a winter weather advisory will not be triggered. For the Cascade foothills or the Coast Range, anywhere from about 2 to 4 inches of accumulation triggers a winter weather advisory. And for any of the lowland locations, so this includes the coast, the Willamette Valley and the Cowlitz Valley, and the Columbia River Gorge, 1 to 3 inches will trigger a winter weather advisory. Alternatively, any amount of freezing rain up to a quarter of an inch can also trigger a winter weather advisory. A watch, generally, this is issued when there's about a 50% chance of a winter storm warning being issued once the event gets within 36 hours, the watch being issued at 48, like I mentioned earlier. A winter storm warning in the Cascades is a foot or more of snow being expected, with snow levels being 5,000 feet or lower. For the Cascade foothills and the Coast Range, 4 inches or more. I will also add Puget Sound lowlands. The trigger is 4 inches or more. And for the Oregon lowlands and Southwest Washington, that is 3 inches or more. I will note that these numbers are for 12-hour totals. Now, continued for the special warnings. A snow squall warning is a short-term warning over a small area causing near whiteout conditions. In general, this does not follow the typical forecast zones, even though it is issued by the National Weather Service, tends to be a little bit more polygon based. Blizzard warnings, sustained wind speeds of 35 miles an hour or higher, plus near whiteout conditions via snowfall for 3 or more hours. Whiteout conditions are defined as visibility being a quarter of a mile or less with there being snowfall on top of that. An ice storm warning is issued with a quarter of an inch or more of ice expected. If there is any sort of snow that is expected with that amount of ice, a winter storm warning gets triggered instead. For sleet, generally about half of an inch of sleet is required to trigger a winter storm warning. I will note that blizzard warnings tend to not be common even by winter storm standards here in the Willamette Valley, though they are more common in the Columbia River Gorge. For cold warnings, frost advisories and freeze warnings are during the growing season only. This is defined from the National Weather Service as the months of April through October. So, because I'm posting this during the month of January, you will not be seeing any of these advisories or warnings for the next couple of months. Frost advisory is low temperatures of 33 to 36 degrees, with a freeze warning being issued for 32 degrees or lower lows expected. If the low is expected to be 28 degrees or lower, this triggers a hard freeze warning. Now, generally speaking, these will only be issued during April or October because, except for one day in May, these are the only days where the lowlands have gotten below 32 degrees using the Portland airport data as my example. I don't have data for every single location in the Willamette Valley. Cold weather advisory, these go off of feels like temps, so this includes wind chill. So for the lowlands, 11 to 25 degrees Fahrenheit, in the gorge, 6 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and the Cascades, negative 19 degrees Fahrenheit to 0, depending on your location. For the Washington Cascades, the trigger is 5 degrees lower than the Oregon Cascades. So in the Oregon Cascades, it's negative 14 to, to 0, but in the Washington Cascades, it's negative 19 to negative 5. An extreme cold warning is when feels like temperatures occur of 10 degrees or lower in the lowlands, the in the Columbia River Gorge 5 degrees or lower, and the Cascades if you are negative 15 or lower in Oregon, or negative 20 degrees or lower in Washington. These commonly get issued during our Arctic blasts, especially if it is a what we call a backdoor blast, where you have winds coming through the Columbia River Gorge, bringing down these feels like temperatures. For wind, a wind advisory is issued when wind gusts of 45 to 57 miles per hour is issued, or sustained wind speeds of 30 to 39 miles per hour. This, however, can be bypassed if the potential damage risk occurs from tree leaves early or late season windstorms, most commonly in the months of October and April, as significant wind gusts have occurred in both of these months, less commonly in other months. Generally, I find the cutoff is normally about 40 miles per hour or 35 if it is very extreme conditions. And that's just because the added stress of having all the leaves on the tree, it breaks it easier from a lower wind speed. Wind advisories, however, are not issued in the Columbia Gorge, the coast, and the Cascades because average wind speeds do tend to be higher there. That being said, they still can receive high wind warnings. Wind gusts of at least 58 miles per hour for the valley and the coast is required for a high wind warning, or 75 miles per hour in the Cascades or the Gorge. For any skiers out there, if you are seeing a high wind warning, there's a very small chance the upper lifts are running, and there's a significant chance that most of the lifts aren't running at all, except maybe the bunny hills. So that would not be a great day to go skiing, in my humble opinion. For sustained wind speeds, 40 miles per hour or greater is required, or 50 miles per hour in the Cascades or Columbia Gorge. Sometimes a high wind warning can be intertwined with what's called a hurricane in force high wind warning or hurricane force wind warning, depending on who which information source you're looking at. And that just simply means the gusts are 75 miles per hour or greater. This would only be for the valleys and the coast. It would not be issued for the Cascades or the Gorge because that's already their criteria. For heat, heat advisories use what's called the heat risk value. And this is something experimental from the National Weather Service that takes into account both the temperature anomalies of the heat, how long the duration of the heat is, and then also the spread between the daytime highs and the overnight lows. So based on what I have experienced when a heat advisory is triggered, generally I find multiple days of 95 degrees or higher or lows of 65 degrees or higher will trigger one. Alternatively, a single day of 98 degrees or higher typically he triggers it. An excessive heat warning requires a heat risk value of 2.66 or greater. These are typically issued where multiple days are expected of 100 degrees or higher with limited overnight relief, or if there's a single day where it's just going to be in the mid 100s. So just to let you know what this scale is, it goes from 1 to 4, where 1 is minimal risk, where only those who are the most sensitive to heat should have any sort of issues. And 2 is anyone sensitive to the heat could experience issues. 3, anyone without proper cooling will experience issues. And then 4 is everyone will have issues and cooling systems will struggle because of the extreme nature of the heat. For other visibility concerns, dust advisories and dust storm warnings are very rare in Western Oregon and Western Washington. In fact, I have not seen either of these been issued. A dust advisory is when blowing dust reduces visibility to less than a mile, with a dust storm warning being when blowing dust reduces visibility to a quarter of a mile or less, with wind speeds of at least 25 miles an hour. Dense fog advisory is when localized fog reduces visibility to a quarter mile or less, where a freezing fog advisory is essentially this. However, there's freezing temperatures associated, causing potentially hazardous roadways conditions. However, if it is only affecting visibility but not icing the roadway, this tends to not be upgraded to a freezing fog advisory, instead just staying a dense fog advisory. A dense fog advisory tends to be more common in areas deeper into the Willamette Valley rather than the Portland metro area, with the Chehalem Mountains pretty much being the dividing line, because a lot of times when you can get these pattern setups to receive fog in the Willamette Valley, it's not uncommon to receive easterly winds coming out of the Columbia River Gorge, which pretty much stops when it hits the Chehalem Mountains and weakens significantly if it is somehow able to get past. Moving on to dense smoke advisories, this is when smoke causes visibility to be reduced to a quarter of a mile or less. This is different than the air quality alerts issued for wildfire smoke. For the coastal watches and warnings, this is separate from the marine watches and warnings, which I am not going to be talking about in this video. A beach hazard statement pretty much signifies that's a high sneaker wave threat, typically when swells reach 9 feet or greater. A coastal flood advisory, typically these are for tidewater areas at 80% of flood stage, and tidal anomaly is 9.5 feet or higher, or the tidal anomalies can override the flood stage regardless if they are at least the following amounts. In Southwest Washington, 11 feet, which is measured at Willapa Bay. At the northern Oregon coast, 10.5 feet measured at Astoria. In the central Oregon coast, 12 feet measured at Newport. It is technically possible for the Portland metro area to receive a coastal flood advisory. That's because the Columbia River tidewaters actually penetrate all the way up to Bonneville Dam and on the Willamette River, all the way up to Willamette Falls. That being said, it would be insanely rare if anything were to occur. And if it was occurring, the coast would almost certainly be receiving a coastal flood warning with tidal anomalies of 14.5 feet or greater. Now, a high surf advisory is when swell energy reaches 1 million joules per meter second of area, and then a high surf warning is swell energy of 1.6 million joules per meter per second area. Moving on to our fire warnings. And generally speaking, a fire weather watch and a red flag warning gets issued under similar conditions. Generally, these require dry fuels, humidity of 25% or lower at current temperatures. This is known as the relative humidity level. And when sustained at 15 miles per hour with gusts of 25 miles per hour, if it is a red flag warning, if it is just an advisory, generally 10 miles per hour with gusts to 20. Also, possible lightning can also trigger a fire weather watch or a red flag warning. And then air quality. Air stagnation advisories are issued if inversions are present for 2 days or more with minimal mixing, winds 6 miles an hour or less, and no precipitation. There's a lot that goes into that one. These commonly can get issued with dense fog advisories as well. An air quality alert is issued by the Department of Environmental Quality for bad air quality at their discretion. That means it can occur for inversions where air doesn't mix out properly and the air pollution just sits at the surface. More commonly, it gets issued in our area for wildfire smoke. And then an avalanche warning. This is the last watch or warning that I'm going to be talking about. This does not apply to ski areas inbounds. That's because they have their own avalanche control systems, which prevent avalanches from even occurring. And part of their special use permits require the ski areas to close if conditions are unsafe. So as a result, like if, for example, if you're skiing Mount Bachelor, if there's any avalanche, even a slightest potential for avalanche risk, Mount Bachelor will close the backcountry areas on the backside. This generally gets triggered when there's an increased stress on snowpack via any of the following conditions. Either meltwater is starting to occur underneath, there's either heavy snowfall, there's strong winds, and slash or a rapid increase in temperature. Generally, at least a couple of these are required. These are generally issued by the Northwest Avalanche Center. So that is going to be it for this video. So unless if there is a significant weather event in the month of January, I will talk to you all on the next PNW Weather 101 episode where I truly hope it is less text heavy than this. But I'll see you all then. Stay safe out there and take care.